All right. Colton reached across. Oh, that's a bad opening. Colton seized his sister by the shoulder. A little harder than he intended to, in order to try to calm her down in the window seat of the plane. She kept babbling about something on the wing. All right, let's give his last name here. We'll call him Colton Wagner. Okay. She kept babbling about something on the wing, but this was not the first time Tracy had been seeing things. It might have been the worst possible time for her to start up, though. You have to calm down. To Colton's knowledge, he had never been able to calm her down by simply telling her to do so. But he was scared and desperate. Someone needs to do something before it brings the whole plane. He clapped his hand over her mouth, pulling her away from the small port window and back against the cushioning of her seat. She tried to rake his hand away with her nails, drawing the slightest bit of blood through the scratches, but he fought her hands away and held on. If anyone else grabbed his sister this way, he'd kill them. Alright, let me. Colton wouldn't look. Colton wouldn't look, but he could see the movement of other passengers in their immediate area as they stirred and looked to see what the commotion was. Neither Colton nor Tracy were alive during 9/11. Colton had turned 18 just a few months before graduation, and Tracy was 17 this week. He wasn't sure which flyover state they were above now, between Mom's house on the East Coast and Dad's on the West. But they were still far from their destination. If the plane had to land early because of them, because of her, he was old enough to go to big boy jail now. They did not screw around with disruptions on planes. She was not calming down. He pulled his hand away and quickly took her by the shoulders. Tracy, please. This is serious. You have to stop. You can't do this here. You just can't. She didn't scream, but after one more glance out the window and back at him, she said, "Don't you see it?" "No, I don't. This is only you again. And you have to stop. Just don't look. Don't look until it is over, and just trust me. Okay? She was still crying and shaking as one call light went on across the aisle, and then two more ahead. This situation might already be beyond salvaging, he feared. More passengers started to talk among themselves. More passengers started to talk among themselves. He could hear the anxiety in their tight voices. One passenger losing it was enough to set everyone off. Colton glanced up the aisle. A steward was already coming. He was a tall guy and had muscle showing through his sleeves. Two phones rose up, ready to capture the exchange and turn Colton and his sister into some YouTube or TikTok sensation. There was a whole category and hashtag for the scene about to go down. Other passengers ahead and behind opened their shades and started looking out for whatever had set off Tracy. She had a bad episode back before the end of the school year. There was a close call during prom, but nothing like that freak out during the spring. And nothing like this. The plan was to wait until after they returned from California to start her on new meds. They were both about to pay for that choice. Before the steward arrived, two more women in uniform started down the aisle behind him. Tracy pulled free of her brother's grip and beat her fist against the plastic window with low thuds. Passengers across the aisle cried out. There was no way Tracy Wagner had the strength to break that window out, even at her worst. But just the idea that she seemed to be trying was going to require restraints. She was going to hurt herself in the struggle, maybe others too, and they would both be in trouble wherever they landed. "It's on the wing," she screamed. Tracy spewed "It's on the wing," she screamed. Tracy spewed out a string of curses that brought shock from people around. Some of them had kids. That was going to upset them even more. It's trying to tear apart the plane. Several screams sounded off, up and down the fuselage. I don't know if that's the right word. I think that may be the outside of the plane. Several screams sounded off up and down the fuselage. This was becoming a full panic now. The muscular steward arrived and eyed the both of them as he held the seats and leaned down. Colton covered his face with both hands. Colton covered his face with both hands and rubbed until the skin burned. "Ma'am," the steward said with annoyed authority, "someone in the seat ahead cried out, 'Jesus Christ.'" Colton couldn't have agreed more. "What is that? What is that, Mommy?" The child asked in a shrill tone. He couldn't tell if it was a boy or girl, just that they were young and scared. "What's it doing?" Man with a deep voice joined the chorus from a few seats back. Is anyone else seeing this? This is insane. Someone tell me what's going on. Colton uncovered his face and braced himself for what Tracy would do and how the staff, how the, let's say crew, because we're on a plane, right? How the crew would react. One of the women called out in a southern accent, "Everything is fine. We have this under control." The steward stood up as well and projected his voice as he turned his head from one side to the other. "Everyone calm down. Everything is all right." I tried that, Colton thought. The calm down thing. please make it stop. Tracy begged as she rocked forward and back at the end of her seatbelt, staring out her window. Colton regretted switching seats with her now. Make it stop before it tears us apart. What is that? A woman yelled. Someone explain this. The steward took a deep breath and leaned down. Ma'am, can you tell me your name, please? What's on the wing? Is that really a monster on the wing? Colton wanted to scream at his sister to shut her mouth. He had dealt with her and looked out for her as best he could all their lives. He couldn't help her here. He couldn't fix this before she tilted the situation past the point of no return. She would be sorry later, but later wasn't going to be soon enough. God, it's tearing the plane apart. We're all going to die. Colton inhaled to yell at her. He thought he might even slap her. That was probably going to get him into restraints as well. But it wasn't Tracy talking now. Those last two declarations were from two different voices on their side of the plane. but from other seats. Both those voices were men. The crew seemed to lose their focus on Tracy now. The shrill kid started yelling over and over. Monster, monster, monster. Adult voices. Said the same thing. They said similar things. Get that thing off the wing before we all die. A few passengers from the other side unbuckled and crossed the aisle to look out the windows. Some of them started screaming with no words at all. The steward turned in a full circle, first one way and then the other. Everyone. Before he could give his blanket instruction, the stewardess with the southern accent called him over from a set of empty seats a few rows up. Drew, Kathy, come see this. They moved up. They moved up too and stared out the window without a word. Colton wasn't sure he could have heard them anyway, with the entire plane screaming and crying. He glanced at his sister beside him, who seemed to be the only other quiet passenger left now. Her eyes were squeezed shut, and she folded her knees up into her chest in the seat with her. She plugged her ears with her fingers and rocked back and forth. Tracy, he reached out and touched her shoulder gently. She didn't pull away or overreact, but she let out a little squeak of fear. Okay. Drew, the steward, spoke to the other women loud enough for Colton to hear after all. Volpe! Hey, sorry if I missed your message there until now. Drew, the steward, spoke to the other women loud enough for Colton to hear after all. Go tell the captain. Tell him what? Kathy, the stewardess, demanded. Exactly what we've seen. Get Jay to tell a fun fact. Alright, hold on just a moment. Exactly what we've seen. The stewardess with the accent rose up and pulled Kathy along with her. Exactly what we've seen. The stewardess with the southern accent rose up and pulled Kathy along with her. What the hell are we seeing? Kathy wanted to know. The plane is under attack, Drew said. He pitched his voice lower, and Colton would have missed the last bit, along with all the other screaming passengers. If he hadn't been looking right at the man's lips as he spoke. Tell him to land the plane wherever he can as fast. Hold on. Wherever he can as fast as he can, or it's going to go down all on its own. The women ran up through the aisle, shoving passengers out of their way. Drew stood and held out his hands, waving for the others, to sit down. But not saying anything to encourage them to do so. All right. All right, we'll talk about planes since we're writing a story about planes. The first time I was ever on an airplane, I think I was 5 years old, and we were flying from Ohio down to, I want to say, Georgia. And we were moving down ahead of my dad, who was finishing out work up in Ohio and would be coming down to join us later, where he'd lined up a job. My dad changed jobs a lot, even when he was in professional fields. It was just when he got tired of a place, he moved on to somewhere else about as quick as he could. I've been on a plane a few more times since then, various places, but not very often. The very last time I was on a plane, I want to say was 2013. I flew out to San Antonio to be at Worldcon with Max and Laurie, when I had a book with them for Perpetual Motion Machine. I think it was probably my second book that ever came out. And so I flew out there and flew home. It wasn't that far of a flight. But that was kind of the last time I ever got on a plane. And it's not that I'm afraid of flying, it's just I hate the inconvenience. We have smaller airports around here, so it's not too bad when you got to fly out somewhere. But if I had to bring books or anything like that, it would just be a terrible inconvenience for me. Spending the money, mailing them out would hardly make it worth going to the convention at all. So even when it's a long distance, I tend to drive. And since that time, of course, I have all these medications, which of course you can take them on the plane, but if anybody started messing with them or that kind of thing, I'd probably be in some trouble. So like trying to keep track of all that and pack it the way it's supposed to be packed and hope it, bring it on your carry-on because you can't afford to lose it or that kind of thing. It's just not worth it to me to fly anymore. So I haven't flown in years and years now, and I just have no desire to. Jenny and I have talked about, going overseas for trips at different points, but with my medical stuff, I hate to disappoint her, but it's just a mess to get out somewhere and, get medical care that you need and make sure you got the medications you need and if something were to happen and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not saying it'll never happen again, but it's not something that's high on my list of priorities. So just being on planes just seems like an inconvenience, even as fast as they go. Just the hassle of moving in and getting into your seat. I'm trying to figure out what I'm hearing up there. I think something got up in the ceiling of my office there. All right, but I don't tend to fly very much anymore. So since I was a kid, I haven't done it much, and that last time was for Worldcon when I went out to see Max and Laurie. Trying to figure out, something got into the ceiling. We got lizards around here, and every once in a while they'll get up into the eaves of the house, and then they'll get up into the attic sometimes too. All right, so let's see what's about to happen here. Colton breathed out a few curses of his own. He kept his seat buckled. knowing if the thing Tracy had seen was real, then the plane might go down at any moment. Maybe I'm seeing things like the characters in the story are. Tracy, the plane might go down at any moment. He leaned out ahead of her, being careful not to touch her and set her off again. Outside, the sky was clear above them and brilliant blue. The clouds in the sky were below them, white and fluffy. Through them and between the gaps, he could spy the colored shapes of fields of crops below. But the wing was clear. The chaos of screaming passengers inside was a counterpoint to the utter peace outside the window. There was no monster. Nothing was tearing the wing apart. Everyone screamed at once. Colton jolted, but still saw nothing but smooth flying outside. Several people I don't need a quotation mark there. Several people yelled about the engine. He could see both engines on that wing, and they were fine. Fell right off the plane. The other one is burning. We're on fire. Drew pushed Colton aside so he could look out the window. This can't be happening. What's happening? Colton asked. Drew pulled away and ran up the aisle, knocking people flat who refused to stay in their seats. Okay, let's have Drew say one more thing. Just stay seated, sir. Colton looked out the window again. Still nothing. I'll say at still nothing. I don't know if that's a proper sentence, but that's how I'm going to say it. All right. Tracy opened her eyes and stared into her brother's face. Is it over? He shrugged. I don't know. I still can't figure out what he didn't. Okay, let me make that a new sentence. He didn't know how to finish. She glanced out, started to shake, and hitched a few times with small sobs. What do you see? Colton asked. One of the engines is missing. One of the engines is missing. The other is on fire. And that thing it's still tearing us apart. What does it look like? He asked. What does it look like to you? She closed her eyes and went back to rocking. She took his hand and squeezed hard until his knuckles ached in her grasp. He allowed it. Colton glanced out again as other passengers screamed about the monster climbing on top of the plane. It's going to get in here with us, someone yelled. People hugged one another as they cowered in their seats. Passengers ran across the aisle in mass and stared out the opposing windows. It's over here now. It's going to rip the wing right off. We're going to fall from the sky. Alright, we're going to fall from the sky. We're going to fall from the sky. Colton couldn't see from all the bodies in the way, but he was sure if he looked out one of those windows, he would see nothing. Then the plane lurched downward, lifting Colton's stomach and stealing gravity for a moment. All right, let me fix that. Stealing gravity for a moment. Everyone screamed. Tracy squeaked. More people clamored. All right, let's fix that. More people clamored to their seats and buckled up again. The PA system clicked open live. Man's voice said, "This is the captain. We all see what is happening. I can't explain it either. We all see what is happening. I can't explain it either. But I'm getting us down on a runway in one piece. This is going to be a fast and furious landing. So you need to buckle in and assume crash position to protect your heads, and to protect those you love. He clicked off a few more. Okay, he clicked off. Let me make that its own paragraph. A few more buckled in, but not everyone. The plane lurched down again. Drew and his partners worked their way down the aisle, encouraging everyone to buckle in. They threatened others to get them moving. And he even bodily lifted one man nearly his own size through the air and back into an empty seat. As the steward and stewardesses moved to buckle themselves in, Colton caught an angle as the steward and stewardesses moved to buckle themselves in. Colton caught an angle through the As the steward and stewardesses moved to buckle themselves in, Colton caught an angle through the window across at yet another pristine wing. This isn't happening. Tracy whined. And muttered, "I can't believe it either." That wasn't what he meant. But he let it go. The plane shifted forward and down into a near dive. Screams drowned out with the high, strained roar of engine noise. Tracy squeezed harder. one man in a fine suit lifted up from his unbuckled seat and slammed hard into the ceiling. Okay. He floated in the air for a couple seconds before slamming down on the floor again. Well, he wasn't on the floor again. Slamming down on the floor, unconscious. His blood smeared the ceiling between lights. Several people heaved out their last meals. Only a couple managed to prepare a bag first. The plane leveled for a moment, but then the engines wound up again as they tilted into another partial dive. A woman in jeans and a plain sweatshirt with no writing on it stood up. She held a young girl that must have been her daughter. Woman walked calmly up the aisle. She stepped over the unconscious businessman and turned in a space between rows of seats. There, she started fumbling with the handles on the door. There was a moment of let's say, a frozen moment where everyone on board seemed to be holding their collective breath all at once. Colton told himself that those doors were locked. You couldn't open them like people did in movies. That wasn't real. everyone started breathing again and yelled for her to stop. A few of them said things like, "Don't let it in here with us." The plane undulated through its rapid descent, and she rocked on her legs as she continued to work with the door. The girl was crying then and begging for her mother to stop. One of the levers shifted and rolled down with a pop and crash. Colton felt a change in pressure that popped his ears. Colton felt a change in pressure that popped his ears. Now, some people got up and ran at her from both directions. Colton thought that wasn't anything he would do until he realized he was out of his seat and running ahead of the rest. Masks fell from the ceiling, and more people screamed than actually put them on. He tried to pull the woman backward with her daughter in her arms, but she kicked and fought with the same intensity he had seen from Tracy a time or two before. He ate a few more elbows from well-meaning passengers trying to help too. Colton came to a conclusion faster than the others. Maybe it was from dealing with Tracy all these years, but he knew there was no calming her. There's no calming this person, and no stopping her in time. Unlike the others around him, he shifted his effort to lifting the daughter out of the mother's arms. Okay, let me make this a new paragraph. The girl tried to hold on at first, as her mother used both hands to break the seals on the door. As the bulky hatch shifted outward and the wind picked up in force through the gap, several of the good Samaritans. All right, let's see if we can spell this right. Several of the good Samaritans backed off and retreated to their seats again. That actually helped Colton a little. As the door swung out on the open sky and a perfectly fine wing free of monsters out there, the girl pushed away from her mom instead of holding on. Colton, all right, let me do a new paragraph here, sorry. All right. Colton pedaled backward, fighting to keep his feet under him as he clutched the girl, and the earth tilted into view through that open door. The mom wavered as if she might be reconsidering her mad choice. But then she took hold of the bulkhead on both sides and launched herself out the door. He tried to watch which way she went. Did she whip up and away from the diving plane? Or did she plummet out of view? Maybe bounced off the wing where everyone saw some monster Colton Wagner could not perceive. His eyes watered from the violent wind, and she was just gone, as if she were never there at all. The girl screamed and bawled. I don't think that's the way you spell that when people are crying, but I'll check it later. As Colton backed into his seat. He strapped her into the empty seat beside him, and then buckled himself. His oxygen mask whipped around, alright, let me fix this, and hit him painfully in the eye. Air was getting thin as he finally got hold of it and strapped it over his mouth and nose. He tried... Okay, I think this is the same paragraph. He tried to help his sister, but Tracy screamed and fought him off. He got a mask on the girl instead. She cried out about something, but he couldn't make out the words. Tracy finally allowed him to help her, and they all breathed deeply of the fresh oxygen. Colton expected to see things, maybe even people. getting sucked out of that open door. It wasn't like that though. It wasn't like that though. It was very loud and windy. But nothing like in the movies. He blinked against the wind. Oh, hold on, let me have them do something here. Tracy took a death grip on his hand again. He wasn't sure how he got loose from her the first time. If he'd thought about it too much, he'd have stayed seated, and the girl would have gone flying with her mom. The girl gripped almost as hard as Tracy on Colton's. No. The girl gripped Colton's other hand almost as hard as Tracy. Good. Coming to the ending point of this story. He blinked against the wind and tried to see out the windows on both sides. They were under the clouds now, and leveling out over the ground. They were under the clouds and leveling out over the ground now. The wings were clear. All the engines were accounted for. Nothing was on fire. He almost wished he could see what the others seemed to be able to see. It would almost make more sense if he could. The landing was surprisingly smooth. Scene break. The landing was surprisingly smooth, considering. Okay. Tracy slept against his shoulder on one side. The girl, the orphaned girl, was up and alert on the other. eating some cinnamon bun thing one of the staff had brought her. It was getting dark, and it was getting dark and they were still waiting. All their luggage, including carry-ons, were still on board as far as he knew. He'd gotten a couple texts. Alright, let me get this in a new paragraph too. We're going to try and wrap this up as fast as we can. He'd gotten a couple texts. Out to both his parents. Lines seemed to be too busy to get calls out, and subsequent texts were alerting as undelivered. So they waited. The girl's name was Jennifer Drake. She seemed old enough, but couldn't remember any phone numbers to call. Dad wasn't around, but Colton couldn't tell if that meant dead or divorced. She might have been in shock still. So they waited. Okay, wait. Eventually, someone would take her away, and she would probably scream as she went. So they waited. Colton had caught a glimpse of the plane as it taxied away from this isolated terminal. Presumably with all their stuff still on board. There was not a mark on it that he could see. Did you see it? Jennifer, the little girl, asked. It took him a moment to process. monster, you mean? She nodded and then took another bite, talking over it. My mom said she couldn't see it. Then she jumped out. Colton chewed at the inside of his mouth. Did you see it? He thought she wasn't going to answer as she leaned against his side and set the half-eaten pastry in her lap. But then she said, "I did." What did it look like to you, Jennifer? Hairy in some places, dark hair like a gorilla. But it was huge. Where it didn't have hair, where it didn't have hair, it was shiny and rough, like a dragon's skin. Big teeth, big enough to bite the plane. Big claws, big enough to rip the plane. And now my mom is out there with it. Colton took a deep breath and sat there with the girls leaning against both his sides. He suspected her mother and escaped the hairy, scaly, toothy monster in the sky. But he didn't know how to tell her that. All right.